we call tonight More Questions Than Answers.
Yeah.
What are some of the questions that COVID is really, and lockdown in particular, is really kind of thrown up for you, Sally?
It's thrown up questions. Some of you will know that I have a husband that's a hospital chaplain who works in the NHS. So some of the questions is, how can the, well, put it very bluntly, how can the government tell so many barefaced lies about the state of PPE and some of those sorts of things. So I have a lot of questions about what does it mean to respect those who govern us and different interpretations of bits of the Bible, and I have questions about, so what are these negative feelings in me, and then some of that comes down to, well, some of them are around shame, because I do feel incredibly ashamed at the way that so many people have been treated. So, and that there were questions about, why do I feel like this? And it was not until I sort of realised the questions. Another huge question for me is the whole control thing. I find it really hard not to be in control. So I've had a whole set of questions about, where does that come from? What does it mean to trust God in some of this? What does it mean to have been sort of taken out of my sort of comfort zone routine? So I've got questions. I've got questions around that, and then as life has gone on, probably sort of some of you know I got unexpectedly made redundant in September, and I've moved questions about how do I survive, and then on to questions about how do I thrive. So those are some of the sort of questions that I've been trying to ponder and wrestle with, and missing some of the normal vehicles I would have to explore some of those questions.
Well, it's hopefully this evening can be a way of exploring some of them. And I'm really taken by that the kind of first section of what you talked about there, kind of feeling a sense of shame,
yeah,
about how we as a nation, I guess, have been led during this experience. Do you want to expand a little bit more about what you mean on that?
One of the things, I did a PhD on shame for my ordination training. I spent 10 years thinking about shame, and that came, and I've been wanting to study shame for much longer than that. It was all triggered by an incident when I was at primary school, and I've always really since then believed, or I probably couldn't articulate it when I was 8, that institutions shame me. So my default is that institutions may have a propensity to shame me, and the way that the government has acted, I have this sense of vicarious shame. Vicarious shame is when you feel shame on behalf of what other people have sort of said or done, or said and not done, and I have this real sense of vicarious shame. I supervise a student in New Zealand, and we have some fascinating chats about the difference between her government and our government. And so I have this sort of deep sense of shame, particularly over some of the NHS stuff. I did some training on vicarious shame for some chaplains, and one of the people who volunteers for the chaplaincy is also a healthcare assistant, and she felt the deepest sense of shame because she couldn't be a good healthcare assistant because of the constraints of the policy and the constraints the NHS were working under, with lack of proper PPE, the way that dying people were treated, and she just felt this deepest sense of shame. And I feel that sense of shame, that the rhetoric that we sometimes hear on the television is so different from what you hear if you have conversations with people who are working in the NHS. The whole school meals thing as well. I originally trained as a school teacher. I have family who teach. For those of you who were here last month, I'm licensed as a priest where at Al Barrett is, where there would be where a large part of the work is taking food to people, etc., etc. I feel a deep sense of shame that a society like ours, which I've lost track of, the 6th or 7th richest nation in the world,
I think we're going down that league table, it seems to me, every time.
but you know, it said there is no reason why anyone should go hungry, and that children go hungry, I find particularly shameful.
You talk there about kind of the vicarious shame. Just help us when you use the word shame.
Yeah.
What is it that what do you really mean? How do we understand? How do you understand it?
Okay. I normally find it easiest to sort of say guilt is about what we do, shame is about who we are. So when I feel shame, I feel this sense that I'm a bad person, I'm flawed, I'm worthless, I'm unlovable. Those are the sorts of things that we experience when we experience that sense of shame. So shame is the sort of has a global impact on who we are and how we see ourselves. And so that's really what I'm talking about when I feel that sort of sense of shame. It's the sort of I think John Ronson calls it sort of a negative, dark, ugly feeling. It's so that's what I'm really talking about when I feel a sense of shame, and this sort of identifying this vicarious shame where you feel shame because of what people do. You know, I think, well, how can I be part of a cultural society, as an Anglican priest, a church in part, that seems to be doing so little in many cases? How we allow the situation to get like this? What is it we're not doing? So there's this sort of bit of me that feels that I'm not doing all that I can, and I should be doing more. So in a sense, I'm a bad person because I haven't done more to address this situation. I come from a sort of a very militant student background. Those of you who are as old as me, I was at Sussex in the 70s when you did rent strikes and boycotts and all those sort of things. So I was socialised into sort of protest from a very young age, and I sort of feel I feel a bit of shame because I probably haven't kept some of that up in the way that I probably wish that I had now.
I'm intrigued on this notion of shame in the current context, and you know, kind of that sense that you feel the shame of being, you know, of what you are doing or what you aren't doing and what we aren't doing.
Yeah.
And yet at the same time, it seems to me that one of the tactics that if you look at some of the statistics this week, that's been used is almost to say, if people are passing on COVID or contracting COVID, it's because of something that we are doing. It's almost like shame is being sent in the other direction. Just interested in whether you think that's true and how we can respond to that.
I think there's some truth in that. I think people are being personally shamed. You know, if you're overweight, you're more likely to have serious complications. Some of you have known me for a long time and know I've struggled with weight problems all of my life. I think there is personal shaming going on. One of the things I found interesting in studying shame is that my take on Jesus would be that he shamed the Pharisees, so he would shame the people in power, but he didn't shame individuals largely. And so I find shaming as a tactic quite hard if it's aimed personally. And one of the things I've struggled with in thinking through some of the non-violence literature is that they use shaming as a tactic. And I do struggle a little bit because if it ends up being personalised, then that can be really hard if you're on the receiving end of being shamed. So for me, there's this bit of the tension between, I do believe that you need to shame people in power. I think Marcus Rashford has done an excellent job of shaming the government. I heard Boris Johnson was it today saying, you know, he's doing a better job of holding the government account than Keir Starmer is. Without that, you know, that's probably partly a political statement. But you know, I do think, I do think some of the decisions that people made are because they've been shamed into it, and that is certainly a much better response than what Donald Trump did in terms of trying to mobilise people into violence. So, but I do have some issues of when it gets personalised and what that does to people if it's very personalised.
Yeah. And one of the things that I guess many people will associate with on the call, it is that kind of wanting to get people empowered to do something different. And as you you alluded to, you know, that there is a tradition in community development work and in non-violent forms of protest that you shame the person or the organization into making the right choice. I've always, I guess I've always struggled a bit with that, because shame feels like such a negative thing to put onto people. It feels like it feels like it's almost destructive, and in some ways in a non-violent way, a little bit violent, if you get what I mean.
It's fascinating. I mean, I don't personally have children, but I've had some interesting discussions with people about what sending them to the naughty step does. You know, if the alternative to a smack ended up being sending you to the naughty step, and that will be psychologically, potentially can be psychologically damaging, depending on how shame prone we are and things. So but you end up with a whole range of choices, and you end up having to choose, I think, the least worst. And I think probably what I would say is, to me, shaming is at the end of trying to dialogue, persuade, educate, you know, conscientization, all those different things that you would try to do first. Shaming should be the end, not the beginning. But if there is no other choice, then do the ends always justify the means? I think that, again, that's an ethical question that I struggle with sometimes. And some of it comes down to, you know, how and who, and
And what do we do with, because I think I personally identify with this sense of shame. I found I'm not there are actually people on the call that know me quite well, so I'll be careful, but I am not a party animal. New Year's Eve has never been like the highlight of my year, but this year more than ever, I just felt incredibly sad on New Year's Eve, kind of like, oh my goodness, you know, tomorrow is virtually the same as today. It's not, there is what is this sense of new yearness, if you get what I mean. And I guess part of that it is always being obsessed with the political questions, and always being obsessed with kind of questions of society, and just feeling, oh, where is the leadership coming from? And that, I guess, that sense of shame within that, and what I do, and how should I engage, and should I be leading, or whatever. What do we do with all that sense of shame? Because if you feel it, if you're holding it around, how do you see that shift to something that's a little bit more positive than just going, phew.
That's a really difficult question to answer. I think I'm a great fan of Winnicott's concept of good enough. And for me, some of the addressing shame is, am I doing a good enough job where, you know, where I can, doing what I can, and am I not? And trying to get hold of that tension of what is it possible within my sphere of influence to do? And some of the shame I feel is perhaps when I'm not doing enough. The other thing I would say about shame and how you deal with it is that I think in talking about personal shame, I think often personal shame can only be healed, reduced in a community. So I think shame is best addressed in relationship. So one of the things that I find helpful is that I'm part of a small number of communities that are doing something about it, and even if I don't feel I'm doing some of the things that I would really like to do, I'm doing some of the things that I'm called to do. And I've lived with that tension my entire sort of adult life of what I might have passionately wanted to do isn't quite what God has called me to do. And a lot of the stuff that God has called me to do, if I express my vocation in biblical language, I would say that I'm called to equip the saints for works of service. And there are times when I've got immensely frustrated that means I haven't been able to do some of the works of service that actually I really would have loved to have done. But the places God has put me in has been about me equipping other people to do things. Not that I don't do some things, but basically that hasn't been my calling. So part of what's helpful for me in thinking about the shame is thinking about how is the community that I'm part of addressing some of these issues that I'm concerned about. And if I think about me as the community in Hodge Hill, me as the community in the chaplaincy team that I support, and me with a sort of community of some of some of my friends where we're trying to support each other in ministry together. I think we're doing some of the things that I think are important, and that helps me with process some of my shame that I'm not doing perhaps what I would really like to, but it's not because I'm sitting around doing nothing, it's because there are other things that are in a sense my unique role to contribute within this.
Yeah, that's really helpful. In some ways, it leads us on a little bit to how has that been connecting with those communities when, you know, lockdowns happening? Does that exacerbate the sense of shame because actually you don't have those regular interactions in the physical sense with other people?
Absolutely. One of the hardest things for me is not having the little interactions with people. As someone who, you know, whose background is in informal education and wanting to be an informal educator, you will know that, you know, as a community worker, informal education, those sorts of roles, you casually but very purposefully structure conversations, you structure encounters, you do all sorts of things designed, you know, in a sense you would do what you might call an intervention with someone, but they have no idea that's what you're doing. But that's what you're doing. But like we were, like you say, you just can't do that on Zoom very easily, and it can be much more difficult to ring someone up to do it because I think, well, why have you rung me? And things like that. So I miss that immensely. I can do quite a lot on social media with different people in different sorts of ways. But as a priest, I particularly am missing the opportunity to listen to members of the congregation. I've still got someone. I can't remember how far back we were looking at Genesis, and I wrote a reflection for church on Genesis, and someone rang me up and said, "I'd love to talk to you, but I only want to talk to you face to face." And you know, months and months on, it's not really been safe to talk face to face with someone who's in their 80s who wants to talk to me about something that caused them shame many years ago. And I'm struggling with that and I have to struggle with I'm not being a good priest. And this is I'm self-supporting. It's not a role I'm paid for or anything, but I'm struggling with this construct of I'm not able to do some of the things that I would really like to do because of the constraints of social distance, and being mindful that I'm married to someone who works in hospital, albeit a children's hospital, that I'm married to someone who is out of the house every day, certainly Monday to Friday, and sometimes at weekends when he goes into work, and being mindful of being, you know, silently having the virus and passing it on. So feeling I have to be ultra cautious in what I've been doing, even when we weren't sort of strictly in lockdown.
Yeah. Are there any kind of theological frames or ways of coping with that kind of not being able to that have been particularly helpful, that kind of help you paint it in a larger picture?
Yeah, one of the I hesitate to use the phrase "Cambridge doctrine," but when I was looking at urban youth work many years ago, I spent quite a lot of time thinking around the whole idea of kenosis, and about you know, from Philippians 2, where it talks about Jesus emptying himself. But the thing about Jesus is it was a voluntary choice to empty myself, and my understanding of kenosis is often about voluntary relinquishment, but pretty much everything I've had to do has been compulsory relinquishment. I've had no choice, I've had no control, and I found that particularly hard. For those of you who are Methodists and have just done the Methodist covenant thing, I find that an immensely difficult prayer to pray. So one of the things I've been struggling with a little bit is that, I'm out of control. I haven't chosen, I'm of the age where I grew up with, I came to Christ through sacrifice, take up your cross type theology. So that the idea of sacrifice is fine, but voluntary sacrifice is fine. It's this compulsory sacrifice that I'm actually really struggling with, because I haven't chosen all the sacrifices that I'm having to make. And that lack of choice is something I'm struggling with, and probably is something God is wanting to teach me, because I very much am a bit of a control freak. But thinking thinking about kenosis, I found helpful in trying to give myself a little bit of a theological framework in understanding some of the frustrations that I'm feeling.
And how do you work with those? I mean, I think that's really helpful, the kind of involuntary emptying, the involuntary, and I guess sometimes it feels really frustrating because some of the decisions and some of the reasons why we are able to do some things and not others, or vice versa, seem a bit strange, or a bit lacking in science and lacking in basics. So you're wrestling with that. What are there rhythms? Are there things that you put in place that will help you to kind of to see how it fits within that bigger framework?
I would say that I'm struggling with the rhythms. I'm someone that would want to have a rhythm, and I'm someone that had fairly well established rhythms. That again, I'm struggling with a little bit. Again, I'm of the age where I have a quiet time every morning. First thing, it's what I was grown up with as a teenager. I've never not done it, and so I found the grounding of the first part of the day is a little bit of time with God. I journal a bit, but probably not at the deeply profound. You never think of publishing any of it. I blog twice a week, and I've been blogging twice a week for a long time. I've kept that up all through lockdown. That makes me do two things. It makes once a week I blog about an image or a photo or a picture. I live a little bit too much in my head. So blogging on a photo or picture makes me mindful of taking pretty photos when I'm out, like Carmel showed us at the beginning. But it makes me focus on something out here, and that's the rhythm I find really helpful. Then I do that on a Friday, and on a Wednesday I blog about something that's current I'm thinking about. And when I say blog, I'm talking about 200 to 300 words, or even 100 words. It's not a great long thing, but it's making me think about what's happening in my life. So I know that twice a week I'm going to put something out there. The other thing that I find I do with that is that makes me accountable. If I blog something I'm going to do, I will always do it, because I won't say something in a blog and never do it, because that would be that's so dissonant with my values, and so hypocritical. So one of the things I blogged about recently, I went for the word for the year, and my word for this year is courage. And so I blogged about when I'm courageous, I write a little note and put it in my box that says courage. And I blogged about it, so I'm more actively doing it than had I not put it out there. I did a Will Taylor's Good Enough podcast on habits, because my New Year's resolution thing, how many years did I lose weight on my New Year's resolution? I mean, it's 30, 40 years. So, construing things in habits, and that's how I see that's how I see rhythm. So I think the important rhythms for me are sort of grounding at the beginning of the day and getting out and walking into nature. I live in relatively central Birmingham. I live in Erdington, if anyone knows Birmingham, which isn't terribly pretty. So we've got a local park, and then sometimes I will drive slightly further to slightly nicer parks. The further you go out in Birmingham, the nicer the parks get. in reality. So the getting out, because I find that when I go out walking, it helps to clear my head. The one thing I'm missing from working is I had an hour's commute each way, and that was processing time. So I find that if I don't get out for the walk, I don't have the processing time, so I'm left with loads of junk in my head. So I need to get that processing time. And the other probably the rhythm I have is I've been putting together sort of lockdown soundtracks. I found listening to music quite cathartic. I can't sing, but if I'm on my own, well, I will do it sometimes if Paul's here. There are things that I will sing loudly because they're cathartic for me, and they just help get rid of my emotions. I'm a strong introvert who needs sometimes to get things out, and some of the sort of songs I'm listening to help help me get some of the negative emotions out, and also perhaps recognise some of the negative emotions that are in me that I won't necessarily want to own up to. I don't always want to sort of deeply process difficult emotions. Apart from shame, because I'm so fascinated by shame, I'm very happy doing things around shame. But I am finding that sort of regularly sort of looking at the music I want to listen to, because that is cathartic for me, and it's probably one of the most cathartic things that I'm engaged with at the moment.
Yeah, it's interesting.